Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley and I'll be your host today. Joining me for this episode is textile artist Emma Rosa. Just to give you a little bit of background before we start our chat, with a keen observation of nature, Emma uses multidisciplinary techniques and mixed media to create botanical studies from fabric and thread. Marrying a foundation in fine art and a past career in dressmaking, she utilises machine embroidery with traditional Japanese flower making techniques, creating sensitive and intricate detailing. Through closely studying flora, she aims to capture the essence of a plant, or indeed a particular stage of growth, such as the fleeting moments of efflorescence and senescence, seeking out lesser-known species and native wild plants, while focusing on distinctive botanical elements, which allow her to pursue a unique sculptural presence. Emma is constantly pushing the boundaries of fabric and thread utilisation to acquire a desired effect. She's drawn to antiquated botanical illustrations, how they show the whole plant, so every element is important, not just the flower that most regard as the focus of the beauty, where science and art meet. Nestled in the heart of rural Devon, the turning of the seasons, conservation and folklore are the threads that weave through her work. Emma, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here for this episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Gail. It's exciting to be here.
It is exciting, isn't it? Well, I'm really looking forward to our chat. So I wonder if I could start things off by asking you to tell us more about yourself, really, a little about your background and how you came to textile art.
Okay, so I create botanical sculptures from fabric and thread, multidisciplinary textile artist. I marry a lot of techniques such as free motion embroidery alongside Japanese silk manipulation, and I combine it with a lot of self-taught contemporary techniques. My background and how I came to do what I do now has been quite a random choice, really. Really stemmed from career in dressmaking. So for the last 15 years, I have been making my handmade vintage reproduction clothing. And I had a business up until 2013 where I had to stop and I started a family. So that was really my introduction to textiles, sewing. I knew my way around a sewing machine, fabric, threads. I used to supply a lot of my vintage reproduction clothing to US reenactment sites and costume departments and wholesale across Europe. So it was quite a big thing. I presumed that I would actually return to it after the break to have a family, but things didn't quite work out to plan, so, as they don't in life. I remember being so heavily pregnant and trying to fulfill an order. I was about 8 months pregnant and I couldn't even reach the pedals to my sewing.
Oh, bless.
So my stomach was so large at that point. And I remember somebody saying to me, "Oh, don't worry, when the baby comes along, you can just knock up a dress or two while they sleep because the child will be used to the sound of the sewing machine while you've been pregnant." I thought, "Oh, brilliant, that sounds great." That didn't really happen because my child never slept. So that went out of the window. So I took a lot longer with my maternity leave than expected. And I presumed that I would just come back to it, maybe when my daughter was in childcare, preschool. But when the time came, this was around 2018, I'd kind of lost all of my client base and things had changed so much in those years regarding social media. There was a lot of Chinese imports online with really competitive prices, and it just felt like quite a lot of hard work to get back to where I was with my career. And also before kids, I was working long hours, I was working weekends. And obviously that's not feasible when you've got young people to look after. And so I kind of hesitantly brought out my sewing machine again and dusted it off and looked at my fabric. And I just thought, I'm just not sure whether I'm ready to go back into this world. And I think at the same time, I discovered the artwork of the glass artists, the Blashters. They are a father and son team from the late 19th century, where they were asked by Harvard University to create really intricate botanical studies of flora and all made out of glass, and they are completely botanically accurate. And I stumbled upon this book and I was just in awe about how somebody could create something so beautiful out of a fundamental material. And I just thought, goodness me, how lovely to be able to create like that. Oh, I wonder if maybe I could make a flower out of fabric and do the things that I know to do with the materials that I know so well. And so I just sat down and I made this thing. I think it was a lily to start with.
Mhm.
It was very crude. It was compared to what I do today, but there was something in it that felt effortless for me. And I thought, this is lovely. Maybe this is a direction that I could try and experiment with using my knowledge and expertise in a very different field. But maybe there's something in that. Also, I have a background in fine art. That's what I studied. And it almost felt like the marrying of my two worlds again from my dressmaking career, but with elements of my fine art background coming into play. And so that's really where I fell into what I do today.
So, as far as the fine arts concerned, is it something that you would produce quite a lot of preparatory drawings and paintings of before you actually start to use fabric and thread?
Nowadays, I sometimes do, depending on what I'm working on. But I have a very different way of working actually nowadays, where it's a much more intuitive aspect. And it's very different because now I work in 3D, but actually, when I was a fine art student, I was 2D. I was postmodernist, really large paintings. I think it was all the trend in the late 90s. So, yeah, it's quite a different way of working that I do now, actually, I have to say. But I think the one thing that I do share with at that time from being a student is working with no rules and no boundaries. And I know that might look quite counterintuitive to the work that I produce, but I feel that my process is definitely unhindered. Yes.
Mm. 'Cause, your work is, I mean, it's absolutely stunning, but it's very botanically correct, isn't it? Is I think that's
Mhm.
the right way of describing it. So I would have thought that because you obviously are bounded by the botanical correctness of the pieces, that it perhaps doesn't allow quite as much creativity as you might have been used to with your fine art.
Yes, I think there is an element of the things that I was producing when I was younger was very splashy, messy, whereas this is definitely more controlled. Yeah, so I guess there is a sort of a difference, but yeah.
I mean, they are absolutely beautiful, and you must have so many different techniques within each one because producing a two-dimensional rendering of, for example, I'm just looking as I'm speaking to you at that a beautiful passion flower that you've done. That's one thing, but to actually create that in 3 dimensions, to get it to stand up, to think about how you're going to wire it, how you're going to stiffen it, how it's going to look in the round, that's just a completely different thing, isn't it?
Yes, I try and tend to work from the actual real plant if I can. That absolutely always helps alongside some photography and or botanical illustrations. And then have to break it down. So I am constantly thinking of what I want the three-dimensional element to look like. But at the same time, I will completely observe as much as possible each individual element. So, for example, to get the correct shape of the petal, I will concentrate on that. and the stamen, and each of the little individual 2D parts that then are all built up to create the 3D end result. So quite often I will do a combination of drawing out the petal shape, for example, and that will probably be my process of drawing as far as it goes at the initial stages of the process. I will have lots of individual drawings of how each of the petals look, how the stamen will look in a 2D format. And then it's all about experimenting with the actual fabric to create that three-dimensional look and feel to get as close as possible to the actual plant.
I suppose that you're going to have an awful lot of fabrics and techniques at your disposal, because plants vary so much, don't they? One will have shiny leaves, one will have furry leaves. There will be so much variation within. Then you must have to have a whole range of techniques just to hand.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And I think, I don't know whether it's because I am self-taught in my work now, but I do tend to look at the problem of creating and then decide how I'm going to make something rather than letting the fabric and material dictate. So, for example, I decided to set myself a challenge of creating a dandelion seed head a couple of years ago. And I was looking at them all in the hedgerows and I was thinking, God, they're so beautiful in their own right. But I have no idea how to create one of these things at all with the materials that I have and I can manipulate. So I think I set myself aside a good 2 or 3 weeks of absolute experimentation. So absolutely, a dandelion seed head is completely different to a rose petal, for example, which can relate much more to a piece of silk fabric that's been manipulated and stained and then created into that rose shape. So I came up with a way of creating individual silk fibre threads and stiffening the bottom part of it, and then separating individually all the really tiny, minute fibres at the top and fanning them out to create that tiny individual seed head. And then I used a tiny little bit of air dried clay painted for the little seed dot at the end. And a seed was born, and I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do this. And I literally drove myself mad with making billions of these tiny seed heads and then individually placing them onto a free motion embroidered seed head, where I don't know how closely observed anyone has noticed a dandelion seed head, but they've got a slightly porous sort of surface to them. So I then free motion embroidered onto soluble fabric. So it literally, you wash it away and it just leaves the stitching behind. So I could get that porous texture, and then individually attached each of these seed heads onto it. And a new technique was born and a good result was born. So yes, that was a completely different technique compared to anything else that I tried to achieve before.
One of the things that really strikes me is the subtlety of colour. Picking a fabric, that's one thing, but to actually get the colour correct to the plant is quite another. Do you actually paint them beforehand? Do you paint them afterwards? I just wonder how that works.
It's a little bit of a mixture of both, actually. Depending on what surface texture I need, I can quite often embroider straight onto the silk. Or if I want a cleaner finish, I will have plain silk, or it will be just a plain coloured silk. But then I will layer translucent dyes over the top to create that ethereal colour change that's quite subtle in plants and flowers. So it can be a whole mixture. Again, I tend to go in with an open mind and choose what technique fits that particular plant that I'm trying to recreate.
Because of the 3 dimensions, you've obviously got leaves that can be viewed from every angle, including underneath.
Yes.
So how do you manage to get the leaf to look, because embroidery does tend by its very essence to be a bit one-sided. So how do you manage to get the underneath of the leaf to look realistic?
Okay, so that quite often can come in the shaping. If I'm using embroidery to get a texture for the leaf, I will make sure that I choose a bobbin colour that is complementary to the underside of a leaf, because quite often they can be different colours to the top. And I just get the tension just right so that I don't get any loops. So it's a nice clean stitch. And then it might be that I then paint over that stitching to create the slightly different texture, feel, colour of an underside of a leaf. And then when I have my finished leaf, it's then down to the shaping. So the shaping tends to be the last part of the process. And I use some Japanese irons that are quite an old process of Japanese silk flower making techniques, but they are these thin metal irons that have different shapes on the end of them. They're heated, they get very hot, and you can push into the silk fabric and create and manipulate with heat the shape, the desired shape that you wish for. So petals, leaves, and that then completely finishes it and creates the botanically correct end result.
I see. And does it also seal the outsides of the leaf? Because I suppose there's a possibility of fraying, isn't there?
There is, but so this was this was techniques that I sort of came across myself through pure experimentation,
Mm.
where I was trying to find ways of finishing off the frayed edges when I started out, and I was almost embroidering up to the edge of the leaf. But then I stumbled upon just the idea of starching the silk before I've even cut it out. So now that's how I use it, and it creates a lovely clean edge. So I don't
Ah.
have to, so I don't have to
Mm.
sew into it. So actually, then that leads to an even more botanically correct end result too.
Yes, I'm sure. The Japanese irons sound fascinating, but I'm guessing it's not something that you pick up on Amazon.
I'm not sure. I think you can. I think that they are. I got a set of. You can pick antique ones up. I know on eBay, which are really beautiful. But I just, for experimentation at the beginning, I just bought myself just a electric set from a milliner's suppliers actually, because they're used in a lot of millinery processes as well.
Oh, I see. Right. Yes. Yeah, that makes sense because they do sound very specialized, don't they?
I think they are. Yes, they are quite specialist, and it was only through a millinery colleague that I discovered on Instagram actually that I suddenly realized that there were these tools out there, because when I started out, I was trying to create the effect that these irons do, but I was starching, and while starching the fabric while it was still wet, I was trying to get things around the house that I thought, oh, maybe I could shape around. So I was using my cat's toys, got quite quite quickly, alongside some of my daughter's toys as well, because they were just the perfect shape. So I would wrap these fabrics while they were still wet, and then I'd heat them up in the oven to quickly dry them.
My
um,
goodness.
yeah, so I knew the desired effect that I wanted, but coming, I think, from a slightly left field uh, way around what I do, I didn't have necessarily the background knowledge to go, oh, I need these type of tools, or this is the type of tool that does this. So when I stumbled upon these irons, it was like a eureka moment of like, oh wow! And so it's
Yeah.
definitely saved me a lot of time and really progressed what I do. I think definitely yes.
How do you deal with as you're actually putting a flower together, for instance, and you have an awful lot of fabric coming together at once? How do you manage to deal with that?
Through various ways. Sometimes things can be slightly chaotic at the end building stage, and quite often there'll be an image in my head that I have of the end result to be, and your materials don't quite behave in the way that you want them to, so you have to sort of change tack and sort of go with the flow a bit. But I tend to, just before I build the wireframe and I have everything in place, I have all of the sort of 2D now become 3D elements. So I have all the leaves, all the petals, and then it's just building up onto the wireframe, which I then wrap with natural silk thread fibers, which are very, very soft. And I can wrap the wires together with this, and then I just add each element as it goes. So I've discovered that the process of attaching a plant, there is a definite do and don't way, as I say. It's so, for example, take a rose flower. I will build from the base of the flower up from the stem. So I'll create the stem, and then I will add the sepal, and then I will add the petals, and then the stamen last, just to get that realistic sort of layered level, I suppose.
Mm.
And it can be, the attachment can be anything from hand sewn on to fabric glues to heat manipulation. So with the irons that I was talking about earlier, that just the pure heat of fabric on fabric can actually fix them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So again, depending on what I am creating and building will depend on the adhesion technique as well.
Obviously, the wire that you're using needs to be relatively strong because it's holding quite an amount of things, isn't it? In some of the larger, more complex pieces,
Yes.
it's supporting quite a lot. What sort of wire do you use for that?
I use galvanized steel, and I have an array of different sizes, and I have some sort of wire cutting and manipulating tools as well to bend and shape. The one thing that I do like about my process is a lot of it, even though it's quite stiffened fabric and there's a lot going on, it can still be quite lightweight, which is really, really lovely. So I haven't had to get to the point where I've had to weld huge, great steel rods together to
Mm.
to keep it upright. And I do use a little bit of air dried clay in my work as well, but that tends to be towards the base of a creation. So it can actually help with holding everything down and in place, which is quite nice.
As I'm speaking to you, I'm looking at one of your pieces that has black brace, a
Yes.
close up of black brace. I I mean, as an embroiderer myself, I literally have no idea how you've done those. They're just so realistic. They're amazing.
Thank you. Yes, so this is a great example of air dried clay. Originally, I was starting to create hawthorn and acorns and all sorts from fabric, but I wanted to find something that complemented the textile texture and feel, something that was a juxtaposition to that. And so, again, nicking things from my family, I raided, raided my daughter's craft box and found some natural air dried clay. And I started to experiment with that. And I just loved that then that I could ink and varnish clay, and then I'd get the berries. And they were so realistic then. And the lovely contrast between that and the little embroidered sepals and the dead
Mm.
flowers of the blackberries, and then the silk wrapped wire that creates the stem of the blackberries. Then I just loved that. So marrying of processes, techniques, and materials, and I think not being precious about what I use, just saying, "Oh, I'm just a textile artist. I have to just stick to fabric and thread." Sometimes bringing in different elements for me really enhances what I do and then
Mm.
can do in the future.
Because the attention to detail on those tiny blackberries is just amazing, even to the little sort of, I'm going to call it almost like a wispy spider's web around the bottom that they absolutely have, but it's just the
Yeah.
the level of detail is astounding. Really are, as though you could pick them, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you. I think part of my process involves just really closely observing a plant. And I'm lucky enough to live in rural Devon, where I just step out of my house and I'm a minute up the lane and I'm surrounded by hedgerows that are just rife with all sorts of flora and fauna and everything. And it's that ability to really closely study, I think. And the more you look, the more you see, and the more things that open up. And it's those tiny little details, really, for me, that I love the most with trying to recreate, because
Mm.
they almost form the essence of the plant, even more so than the more sort of simplistic shapes that we get to know of a particular plant or a fruit. But those tiny little details are really for me where it's at and what I love the most.
Looking at, I think it was a navel wart that you'd done. Each one of those flowers which are attached to the stem, I mean, I don't know how many there are, actually within the spray of flower, but a huge number. And
Mm.
just the complexity of getting that to come together must be, well, I find it quite forbidding for myself. I'm not sure, certainly not sure I could do it. It's that, isn't it, that makes them look so realistic, because every piece there's been nothing left to chance. Every piece has been perfectly formed and assembled. Even in fact, I like the way that you've got almost as though it's been taken out and still has soil attached to the root,
Yes.
uh, which is yeah, it looks as though it has literally just been yanked out of the soil.
Yes. Yes, I think with those little flowers, yes, I made so many, and to get to the point where they looked realistic, I went through quite a long process of experimenting with different shapes, different colouring, different sizes, just the study of that plant itself. No one petal is actually the same. They go from quite large and quite open at the bottom, and then as you travel up the stem, they get really small and tight and change colour towards the top, a slightly darker green when they haven't quite opened yet. And the different stages of that flower as well. So when they're quite new and fresh, they're sort of that lovely pale, gorgeous green. And then as they slowly get older, they start to get more browns and ochres into them. So again, it's that just observation of detail, and then
Mm.
being to drive yourself a little bit crazy and reproduce a billion of them.
Yes. Actually, one of the things that I would be interested to know is how large that is, because although I suppose one of the drawbacks perhaps of looking at things online is that you don't actually get any idea of scale. And
Yes.
I just wondered how large they were.
So the one that you're particularly highlighting, that is life size to the plant. So it probably stands at about half a metre tall, I would say.
Oh, so it's large.
Yeah,
Mm.
they're quite large flowers, actually. They can get really tall. So I have been mainly up to date working life size to the plant, but I'm just on the verge of experimenting with upsizing a little bit, as I have a few opportunities that might be coming up in the future that can enable me to take it to a slightly different level, which I'm quite excited about. So it's then translating from the small and miniature and how that will recreate itself onto a larger scale. So I'm just tipping my toes in the water of that.
Mm. Yes, I mean, it must be, just looking obviously at all the things that we've discussed today, so the amazing attention to detail and the time that it takes to build and experiment, of course, because as you say, each there are so many different plants and flowers. Each one you come to will need slightly differing techniques, and I just wonder how long some of these pieces can take, because I imagine it would be a vast amount of time.
Yes, it's very dependent. If it's a new technique for me to employ, if it's a plant that I really need to think about how I'm going to tackle it, then the experimentation process and the lead up can actually be way longer than the actual process of actually producing the end result. And then once I am used to a technique, then it can actually be quite a quicker process, because then I can get, if I'm doing a large plant and I've got a lot of petals, for example, then once I know exactly what I'm doing, I then batch process petals. So
Yeah.
a whole load in one go. I will stain them all in one go. And so it just cuts that sort of process down a little bit. But I would say for one of my bigger pieces, say the passion flower that you highlighted earlier,
Mm.
that was quite a thought process, and that was probably the most tightly designed piece that I've done, where I had to make it within the constraints of the vessel that it was being held in.
Mhm.
So that was probably, I would say, a week's worth of work, definitely.
To be honest, if you'd said that it had been 3 months worth of work, it would not have surprised me. There's just so much detail on it. So I can see obviously that it's on a wooden base.
Mm.
I'm not sure if that has glass over it. Not that I can see, but it might do.
Yes, you might be looking at a photo where it doesn't have the glass over, but yes, it's actually set in an antique museum dome. I do like to trawl a salvage fair now and again, pick up all sorts of vessels and containers. But yes, I was lucky enough a few years ago to pick up 3 very old Victorian museum domes, which are just these beautiful display domes and very beautiful old wooden bases. Some had a couple of velvet linings to them, and these very delicate, slightly scarily delicate, actually, beautiful domes over them. So this was a piece that required me to make a particular plant to fit into this particular dome. So yes, it does have glass over it.
Mm. I mean, as well, sort of many of the pieces, I think the piece next to it, it's, I think, a daisy of some description. And the roots are in a sort of flat-ish glass bottle. It just adds so much to the impression of this is a fresh plant. It needs water, and staging them is quite a lot of it, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And I'd say sometimes that is, for me, slightly harder aspect of it than actually making the plants, because it has to be right sometimes. And for this little daisy, again, it's life size, and it's in an old Victorian pill bottle, glass pill bottle, which beautifully just sits on its side anyway. Because I think that they were designed to be held in your pocket, so they're nice and flat. And I just had this idea of, I just wanted the root. I love roots. I love the roots of plants and all of the stuff that you can't see. Again, that's just as important for me as the flower that you can see. And I love the idea of demonstrating something that feels like it was growing. And I'm glad that you picked up on that you feel like it's sort of a fresh flower almost, but that trying to capture the stages of growth in a stationary, like a snapshot of energy almost, that
Mm.
fluorescence that these plants go through on a cyclical process, like this, the energy that's put into flowering and then dying and then laying dormant, and then it all comes to life again in the year later. And just the contrast of the glass with the textile roots coming out of it. I quite like that piece actually myself. So yes.
I know that you were saying that you enjoy going to sales, and do
Mm.
you have an idea in your mind before you start the plant as to how it's going to be displayed? Or is it that you have an amazing selection of things it could be displayed in and you try them all once you've finished it?
A bit of both. There will be some things that where I have this vessel sitting there and I think, well, I just need to make the right plant to go in it. Quite often it will be more about the plant, and then it will be afterwards that I think, right, what is this going to sit in? How is it going to react with the environment of what it's going to sit in? Will there be roots on display? Again, all dependent on the plant and also the desired effect, the end result that I want to achieve.
Do you ever work to commission? I mean, or are these things that are very much your choice?
I do work to commission. Yes, I have had a few commissions in the past, which has been quite lovely. Most often or not, they have been just a plant choice. Oh, can you make one of these? And I'll be like, yes, absolutely, I can. So, yes, but I think the things that you've highlighted today have been very much my choice. So, a bit of both, yes.
Yes. I wonder how on earth, because the reason I'm bringing this up now is because our students who will be very interested in the podcast, will we ask them, how to cost beforehand if they're working to commission, and I just wonder how you can go about cost, or how do you go about costing that for somebody?
Yes, that's always the tricky one for us artists,
So if you
the
if you
age-old
have any
question.
if you have any tips for them, I'm sure they'd be very grateful to hear them, because it is something that, I don't know, sometimes people either go one of two ways. They sort of say, well, I'm sticking to this amount and no matter what, I'm not dropping below, which makes sense from a business point of view.
Mm.
On the other hand, It also might mean that the piece is priced at a level where nobody could potentially afford it. So it's an ongoing, I think, probably with all craft areas, all art and craft areas, it's an ongoing dilemma, isn't it, really?
Yes, it really is. Yes. And how we value ourselves as well. That's always the tricky one.
Mm,
There's always
absolutely.
the devil inside us going, oh, I'm not worthy of charging that. And, so I think for me, it's all about, to start with, I didn't take any commissions just because I was finding my way. But I feel now that I've got to that point where I know roughly how long something will take me to do in advance. So say for example it's a plant that I might not have made before, but it's similar to something else that is the same process to go down, then I will know the size of it and I will know roughly how long it takes. So that's really the main thing, is charging for time. And I'd say for me, I collect scraps of fabrics along the way, and I buy cheap silk stock from dead stock fabric companies where it's ex fashion and design house products, where normally it would go to landfill. But there's a few companies around the world that collect it all up and then can sell it on, which is an incredibly environmentally friendly way of working. And I also save all of my scraps as well and reuse stuff. So actually, I would say the pricing of my materials is negligible sometimes, depending. Then it's simply all about my time. Uh,
Mm.
and also development time as well, to charge for that as well, because that's part of the process. So I would definitely, if it's a new plant, but it's something similar to what I've done before, I will put aside maybe 2 days of analysing, experimenting, drawing out, finding out what shape I need for leaves, etc. And then the make time on top of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you give us any idea of how much a piece would be?
Um, so my passion flower at the moment, it's in a showcase in a museum. It's the Manchester Art Gallery Museum, and that's on display and priced at 2,500. Yes, that was a sort of slightly lengthy, trickier piece to make. So Daisy is, oh, I'm trying to think. So that I pretty much did in a day, actually. Again, materials and costs. The little pill bottle, I think, only cost me about £1 from a sale. I think it was grouped together with a whole load of other sort of Victorian bottles. And again, tiny amounts of fabric. So I'm pretty certain I was using some of my scraps. And then I think pretty much in a day I did that. Trying to think how much I've got that in for. I can't remember offhand.
Bless. It was just as I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it's just as an idea really, because I do think, as you say, uh, as artists, we do tend to underprice ourselves. We think,
Yeah.
will I manage to get what I know really that the time I put into it should reflect. So
Yeah.
I think it's always very heartening to see that people are able to command higher prices, because certainly for our students, that they always have that worry that they won't be able to, I think.
That's it. And I definitely struggled with that in the beginning. And I used to do smaller craft festivals and little fairs. And looking back, my stuff was way too cheap for the amount of time that I put into it. But also, I felt that I was still learning on the job, as it were. Um,
Mm,
so I think it has been only recently, in the last couple of years, that I've actually got the confidence to say, no, this is what I do. This is my skill set. This is how long it takes. And this is my price. And don't be scared to actually put yourself out there with that price, because I think then you might lose the lower end custom base, but you will have
mm.
a whole different sector of people that are willing to pay the amount for art.
It's really interesting to hear you speak about starting off at craft fairs. Now, I know obviously there's a big variance between craft fairs and how much you would expect to be able to achieve at different ones, but you've obviously gone through a process starting off there. And where do you now sell your work? Is it through a gallery, or how does that work?
Yes, it's mostly now. I have found that as lovely as the craft fairs and festivals are, and I tend to steer clear of the small ones now, just because my things are just far too overpriced for what people are expecting to pay.
Mm.
And I mean, mostly I would say now I definitely do fit into the high end craft festival category. But I have been really for the last year or so been concentrating on galleries, exhibitions, and just creating for the more fine art high end market.
Hmm. And where do you find your pieces go to? Is there a particular type of customer that looks to collect from you?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting thing. 'Cause obviously, when things sell from galleries, I'm not entirely sure where they end up because of the element of distance. Obviously, the
Mm.
gallery's selling for you, and obviously commissions, you're working with the customer, so you know exactly where they're going. So it's sometimes tricky to know. But what I have found is that there are definitely two distinct people. There's the
Mhm.
sort of more high end collector, or the person that will invest in art, but there's just something that appeals to them, and it's the more quirky, definitely. People that just appreciate botany, for example. I've had quite a few botanists that have bought off me before, because they appreciate the accuracy, for example. I think flowers in art has been, well, since the dawn of time, really. I don't think you can ever go wrong necessarily with
Mm.
whatever medium you do. There is always an avenue for you, but to sell, I think they're just one of those things that will never go out of fashion. Always been in fashion in some form.
Mm.
But yes, it's quite an interesting. I'd say that the galleries that pick up on me tend to be the more quirky based, very unusual mixed media sculpture. I would say in general, yes.
Mm. It's, I think, probably universal to everybody that earns a living in art and craft, that it's a challenge, really, isn't it? Trying to get on with actually producing and making, but also trying to run a business,
Mm.
because all of the things that we've just discussed are about the business more than the craft itself. How have you found bringing together those two aspects?
Yes, I think like every artist out there, I think that they would rather just forget about the whole business side and just be
Yeah, carry on making.
working. Yeah. But yes, I mean, it's you have to wear so many hats. Promoting yourself on social media, photography,
Mm.
applications for exhibitions or galleries or fair or whatever it is, or however you sell your work. If you're selling your work online, that takes time, and then you need to invest in a website. And there is just so many elements to it that can, yes, it can be some of those aspects I don't mind. Others absolutely detest when it comes to it, and I will put off until the last minute and go, "Oh, got to go
What's
through this."
what's the very worst one for you?
There's always a battle with photography. I find that that's like the bane of my existence quite often, because they have to be good, especially because I'm inching towards the sort of fine art market. They have to be good. And I'm dealing with glass quite a lot of the time,
Mm.
reflective and detailed stuff that needs to be captured in somehow three-dimensional pieces that, honestly, it's, yeah.
Yes, I
So,
I can well I mean, just looking at them, they are beautifully photographed, but and you obviously you've stuck with a very plain background, which shows
mm,
them off really well.
yeah.
But yes, I could well imagine that getting those properly lit and situated, because, not all of them necessarily have a base, do they? So getting them to stand up, I would have thought, would have been a challenge as well.
Yes, definitely. It's just a challenge all round. But I got myself a quite a cheap off Amazon, I think it was, just a very cheap, small desktop light box, and some proper photography studio lights, which didn't cost the earth, I have to say. And for these small studies, have been actually really brilliant for just getting that plain background, less reflection on the glass work. But for the first time this year, I actually hired a professional photographer for some lifestyle shots for my work. And I have to say that is absolutely completely worth everything, because she did stuff I could only ever dream of, which was absolutely amazing. To have some pieces of artwork in situ, perhaps on a chair, on a desk, with some other lifestyle features coming in, was just perfect, and then also allows one to see the scale of the art pieces as well. It's quite essential to have good artwork photographed on a plain white background. So, as you brought up earlier, it's very hard to see the size and nothing in comparison to it. You just don't know, do you? So, I think a mixture of both, I think, is pretty key moving forward.
And did you have to pack everything up and take them along to the photographer's studio, or did they come out to you and found a way of staging them while they were with you?
For this round, my photographer was only about an hour and a half away from me, and she uses a Victorian house, which is literally just perfect for lifestyle shots. So this time around, I did actually take all of my work to this house to be photographed.
Mhm.
It's definitely worth bugging and the journey.
Yes, yeah. And of course, discussing sort of the business side of things, these are all things that cost quite a lot of money, but
Mm.
that aren't necessarily fully visible to anybody just casually viewing them, are they? They're all things that will add to the cost of a finished item.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
One thing that it occurs to me that I haven't asked you is what sort of sewing machine you use. Do you have an all singing, all dancing one, or do you have a particular preference?
Funnily enough, my sewing machine is the same one that I used when I had my dressmaking career, and it's an old brother. It's actually digital embroidery machine, but I actually don't use any of the embroidery features on it. But it was one of those sort of slightly higher end range machines that is just slightly more industrial than a domestic one, but not a full-on industrial one. So it's quite a heavy beast, but it is quite big. But it's just, touch wood, never let me down, and it's just brilliant. It just keeps on going. And I think because I know it so well, I think I'd be a little bit sad if it died on me, because
Yes.
it just becomes an extension of you, and I feel like I'm quite intuitive with it and the way that it works.
Mm. They do get you get to rely on them and they almost they develop they have their own little personality, don't they? So
Totally, yes.
you can get very attached to them. I think sometimes as well people have a almost an ongoing love-hate relationship with their sewing machine, particularly if it's one that plays them up a little bit. You
Yep.
know, it's, they can sort of I've heard people say, "Oh, my machine will only take a certain thread. It has to be the same thread top and bottom," and all this, sort of thing. Do you find that? Is yours very picky, or will it just work with any thread?
I think it's pretty good at working with any thread, but I think nowadays it's me that sticks to my own thread, and because I loosen everything down for the free motion part, and that's pretty much all that I use it for, I just leave it well alone, and it's just at that sweet spot, and and it just seems to do it, and it's fine. But yes, I think days gone by, I definitely experimented with different thread weights and all sorts, and different,
Mm,
tend to use either silk or viscose, but it's the same weight, so it's quite easy to swap between the two.
mm.
Yeah.
I imagine it's a very fine thread, is it, that you use?
It's I can't remember what the grammage is, but it's more of a standard. It's actually embroidery, like machine embroidery thread at a standard
Mhm.
weight. I did experiment with finer, but I found that I kind of had to work harder for the same effect, really. So, and my machine had to work a bit harder as well. So I found that actually just the standard embroidery weight is seems to work.
Mm,
It's fine, actually. Yeah.
yeah. I know that you're a member of the Society of Designer Craftsmen. Can you tell us a little bit about that, I wonder, and how what the process is to be accepted and how you came to want to join?
Yeah, discovered them by accident, really, as I think it's probably on Instagram, and that there are quite a few of these societies out there for artists and crafters, and I just stumbled upon them, and my immediate sort of thought about them was that they're one of the original societies that is out there. I mean, they really were started up by William Morris and the
Oh, really?
yeah,
Gosh. Mm.
yeah. So it's part of the Art Workers Guild in London, and the sort of arts and crafts movement was set up, and the Society of Designer Craftsmen was basically an offshoot off that to allow crafters to come together and share ideas and everything. And it's really been going as a voluntary charity basis for since then. And I think I loved the history
Mm.
it. And so, yes, it had been sort of sitting on my desk as a to do thing at some point. I really need to apply. I really need to apply. And then finally, I sort of took the plunge. I think well, it was over a year and a half ago now, I think. It's the process was pretty okay, actually. I think you have to send some tip top photography that really displays what your creative path is, artist statement, CV, and then I think that you get accepted on certain different levels. I think there's a license or a full membership and another bunch I can't quite remember now. But yes, so I was very humbled and lucky enough to be taken on immediately as a full membership, which was really lovely. And I think it's a great way of being part of the artistic community.
So I just wondered how the society is set up. Do you meet up with other members, albeit perhaps nowadays online?
Yes, I think so. I've been with them for about a year, and they have quite a few events that happen, a few online ones and quite a few in-person ones actually, because I think that they really do like the idea of all of us getting together and just chatting and bouncing ideas off each other. Collaborations can take place. People meet unexpected people that then form friendships and career movements together. I was asked recently to do a talk with them, which was slightly nerve wracking, but it was good. So that was a real insight, my first in person event with them, actually, where I got to talk about my process, my background, and to meet everyone that's in the society and also all of the other members. And they have quite a high textiles department, more so than some of the other fields, actually. Slightly unbeknownst to them, but anyway, it's just not like that. But to be in a room full of other textile artists that really understand, what you're talking about and the highs and lows of being an artist and spending most of your days in a studio, not talking to anyone but the cat, and then suddenly
Mhm.
you're flung out into the world, and
Yes.
it's great. It's a really affirming thing to be a part of, and also for help as well. I mean, you can email any one of them if you have a problem or you need some advice on something to do with your career. Then there will be always somebody that knows what to do and can help you out, which is just brilliant.
Yes, I can imagine. I think, as you say, that so many people that work not just in textiles, but in the art field in general, it does tend to be quite a lonely thing, doesn't it?
Mm.
And just sort of working away in your studio can be isolating. You can feel very isolated. Sometimes it's just great to get someone's opinion on something.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the more that we are sort of holed up, producing our work and not seeing anyone, it's easy for the self doubt to creep in a lot. You start second guessing. Oh my goodness, maybe my work isn't good enough. Should I be doing more? Should I be doing less? And actually, just taking time out of your environment to actually go to these events, to these meetings, even hooking up with other creatives and going to see exhibitions together. It just helps to just get perspective with what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder, Emma, what's next for you? Do you have any exhibitions coming up or a new book underway or anything that you could tell us about?
Yeah, I do actually. I think it's going to be, especially next year, it's going to be pretty exciting. And sort of work starts this year. So I'm literally have just embarked on the process of starting. So I've got I've been asked by Mobilia Gallery in Boston in the US to exhibit with them in March, which is quite exciting. So that'll be my first sort of international event. And amazingly, they picked up on my work being similar to the Blaschka father and son team that did the glass flowers. They're on display in Harvard, and they are just around the corner from Harvard University, this gallery. And they contacted me because they felt that my work was aligned with these glass flowers, which I was completely in awe about because they've been my sort of starting inspiration for what I do. And I was like, oh my, it's amazing. So that's quite exciting.
Oh,
And then,
I'm so pleased for you. What a
mm,
wonderful opportunity. Yeah, that's
yeah,
fantastic. You just now got to work out the logistics of how you get everything over to the
so,
US.
yes, that's the thing. So I'm thinking I'm going to be starting on planning a few pieces that might not require glass because that will make it much easier to transport over there. Um,
Mm.
so thinking slightly differently on how I do things for them. And then after that, at the end of May, I've got a big exhibition in a gallery in Chelsea that's going to be at the same time as Chelsea Flower Show and Kensington in Bloom. It's going to be part of that. So it's a 2-week exhibition at Green and Stone Gallery in London. Hopefully collaborating with a porcelain ceramicist as well. We should be complementing each other quite nicely. So yeah, so basically for those two things, work starts now. And
Yes, I
yeah,
can imagine. So, are you told how many pieces you need to produce, or is it left to you to an extent?
it's both of these actually is left up to me. So for America, I've decided to keep it to a minimum of 3 or 4, just simply due to logistics. And I think they will be on the smaller side. For the London exhibition, completely and utterly up to me. It's
Mhm.
my thing. So I can go as big and as intricate as I want or as time allows me to be, I think is more to the
Yes. Wonderful. So you've got an awful lot coming up, haven't you? Which is great. And as you say, it's obviously it's a way off, but you're going to need that time to prepare.
absolutely. Yes, that's one thing that I have learned is even if something feels a million years away, before you know it, it really won't be. And you'll be panicking and going, oh my gosh, I haven't got enough things and I haven't made enough. And so, yeah, I think
Mm.
preparation is definitely key with these
Well,
things.
funnily enough, I was going to ask you if you had any advice for our students that may be sort of wanting to take their practice into the professional field, start a
Mm,
business with it. It seems to me like that might be perhaps the best set of advice. Don't leave it
yeah,
till the last minute.
definitely. Although it's very easy to do, obviously, because life, we all have lives and things pop out of the woodwork. But yes, I would say definitely preparation, and don't be afraid to set a lot of time aside for experimentation. So when it comes to actually producing work that you've either been asked for to do or whatever it is, then you're not completely starting from scratch. I think you've got some idea and some basis to then work from. So it just eases up the time pressure then,
Mm.
definitely.
Actually, I think that's one of the things that always strikes me, that when I speak to students and when I speak to obviously people like yourself who are professional textile artists, that you will very often the professional textile artists will say, it's really important to experiment. I spend a lot of time experimenting. That's how I improve my practice. They're naturally curious about, how they can improve things, how they can do things differently. I think sometimes students, when they start, underestimate the time that's required to do that.
Mm.
They think that they will sit down that afternoon and produce something that's complete. And in practice, that very, very rarely happens, does it? It requires somebody to take time out to sit and experiment.
Absolutely. And I would say that pretty much 90% of my processes and techniques wouldn't have come about unless I'd set aside that time. It's all too easy to fill your creative calendar with shows and exhibitions and then you're just producing for the next event or the next thing or the next sale or the online shop, but then that you don't give yourself that precious time to push yourself on to the next level.
Mm.
And that really only be achieved. Sometimes it happens in the natural process of what you are doing. Some day you might do something slightly differently and you thought, oh wow, gosh, I've got a happy accident has occurred. But quite often actually, and it might not be days, it might be weeks. You might even have 2 months of just pushing a process to its limits, pushing fabric to its limits, pushing everything to see how far you can get, and seeing what comes out of it is actually vital for really pushing yourself forward to the next level. Because I think it's quite easy to get to a happy place with where you are at your work, you're selling, people are liking your stuff, and it's all ticking along, but then you remain at the same level.
Yeah.
But if you really do want to see how far you can go as an artist, then absolutely vital. Experimentation is absolutely key.
That's such valuable advice. Thank you. Emma, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I've really enjoyed hearing more about your work and your practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gail.